Chapter 11. Rimuru and the gang's board meeting dragged on well into the night, the weight of the situation hanging over us. Anyone have new ideas? I asked, my voice breaking the heavy silence. The room fell even quieter. The others had ideas, no doubt, but they seemed uncertain, unsure whether they should speak up. Their gazes dropped, faces grim with doubt. I sighed, noticing their hesitation. For example, the Orc Lord. I suggested casually. At the mention of the Orc Lord, the atmosphere in the room grew even heavier. The Kijin's faces darkened, their shoulders stiffening. It was clear they were all too familiar with the legend. The Orc Lord wasn't just any monster, it was a mythical creature, one that only appeared once in a rare while. Even Shizu-san, a seasoned adventurer, couldn't help but grow pessimistic at the thought. Shizu, usually so composed, leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. But that's just a myth, she said with a sharp edge, her tone dripping with cynicism. Even if it were true, what could we do about it? I gave her a wry smile. I'm not saying it's certain. It's just a possibility. We all fell silent again, the tension rising as we continued to rack our brains, but then, something unexpected happened. Without warning, a strange presence filled the air. A soft rustle, like wind through the trees, and then she appeared. A dryad. Kijin and the other goblin representatives looked up, stunned. A dryad, Kijin echoed, his eyes wide with surprise. The others exchanged confused glances, but I wasn't surprised. In fact, I had been expecting her. I'd known it was only a matter of time before the dryad of the Great Jura Forest made her presence known. I stood up from my seat, smiling knowingly. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The dryad would be the one to solidify my claim. The dryad, her long green hair cascading like a waterfall of leaves, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Dear ruler of the monsters," she began, her voice soft yet firm, "I beg your pardon for my sudden appearance. I am Trainee, an overseer of the Great Jura Forest. I come with a humble request." Her gaze lifted to meet mine, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The room held its breath. Before I could respond, Benimaru, ever the skeptic, shot her a glare, his eyes narrowing. "What a discourteous demand," he growled. "Trainee, was it? Why are you here?" Benimaru's tone was sharp, but Trainee didn't flinch. She stood calmly, unshaken by his hostility. "I humbly request the ruler of the monsters, the one who has earned the allegiance of the Kijins, to confront the Orc Lord," she said, her voice steady. The room went still. The mention of the Orc Lord brought a heavy tension to the air, and even the normally unshakable Benimaru seemed momentarily stunned. I nodded slowly, recognizing the cleverness in Trainee's request. As an overseer of the Great Jura Forest, she had to know everything that went on within its borders. She was no stranger to the dangers lurking in these woods. Most of the forest, anyway. But Benimaru wasn't so easily convinced. "There are far more powerful tribes out there than a simple goblin village," he pressed. "Why come to us?" Trainee didn't seem bothered by Benimaru's sharp tone. "You're right," she admitted, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "If the ogre tribe were at full strength, I might have gone there first." At her words, Benimaru's expression softened, just a little. The fact that she knew about the ogres, about the events that had befallen them, meant she was no ordinary dryad. She was a guardian of the forest, not an enemy. Realizing he had been outmaneuvered, Benimaru took a step back, his posture relaxing ever so slightly. Trainee continued, her voice gaining strength. "But we can't just stand here anguishing over possibilities. There's something else. I cannot ignore the presence of a certain individual, the one who appeared so suddenly from Lord Veldora's cave before his disappearance." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. So she knew about me. My sudden appearance, my connection to Veldora. The committee shifted uneasily, their suspicions rising. After all, I had appeared out of nowhere, with no clear past or origin. I shrugged nonchalantly, trying to downplay the situation. "The Orc Lord's existence is still a mystery to us," I said, playing the fool. But Kijin and a few of the sharper-minded goblins weren't fooled. They stood by Trainee's side without hesitation. "Dryads are the overseers of the forest," Kijin said, his voice firm. "If a lady dryad says the Orc Lord exists, then it must be true." A collective murmur of agreement swept through the room. "Then it's decided," Benimaru said, his voice carrying authority as he addressed the group. "With the support of Trainee, the dryad, it's clear that the Orc Lord is real. The orcs that attacked our village were completely indifferent to their own deaths. That's one of the Orc Lord's abilities, he can make them fight without fear of dying." He glanced at Trainee, who nodded, confirming his words. Now we know for certain, Benimaru concluded, the tension in his voice giving way to resolve. The Orc Lord must be among the Orc army. And we have to prepare. So now we've come to a conclusion, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. An Orc Lord leading the Orc army for forest domination. The question is, why? The room was heavy with silence as everyone turned their thoughts inward. I didn't want to give them the answer, not yet. I wanted them to figure it out themselves. After all, as a time traveler, I couldn't spoil the important plot. Shuna, always quiet and reserved, raised her hand meekly. I think I know the answer, she said, almost hesitantly. While we were focusing on developments, I asked Soe to examine the village for potential survivors. He found, absolutely none. None, Benimaru echoed, his voice tight with disbelief. Shuna nodded solemnly. There are no survivors. And, there are no corpses either. The Kijin's expressions hardened, their eyes darkening with the weight of what they had just heard. They gritted their teeth, disgusted by the orcs' cruel methods. Even Trainee, the dryad who had been silent until now, visibly flinched, her usual serene demeanor disrupted by the grim news. The Orc Lord's unique skill. Shuna continued, her voice dropping with dread. It's called starved. I felt a chill settle in the room. Benimaru, ever the stoic, clenched his fists, his jaw clenched in quiet rage. We've been rattled, wondering how they could feed such a massive army, Benimaru muttered under his breath. So that's how those pigs operate. The words hit harder than expected. Even Benimaru, usually composed, was visibly shaken. The gruesome implications of what the Orc Lord's skill could mean were now clear. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. So that's settled then. The orcs will inevitably come for us. But we're not without our own power. We have the Kijins, Tempest Wolves, Hobgoblins, and even our Conqueror of Flames, Shizu-san. If the orcs are after nutrients, we have plenty of tasty food for them. The group seemed to settle a bit, as if the reassurance of our strength helped mitigate the weight of the truth. But there was still one more mystery to solve. Benimaru, I asked, my gaze narrowing. Do you have any leads on the connection between the orcs and the masked Majins? Benimaru ran a hand over his chin, deep in thought, before answering. I'm not sure if there's a direct connection, but before the orcs attacked, I had an encounter with a masked Majin. His name was Gelmid. He offered me a name, but honestly, he was too shady. I brushed him off, but not before he cursed me. However, I can assure you, Gelmid was not the masked Majin who attacked our village. The one who attacked us, he was more like an angry, fat man. At the mention of the fat man, a realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. Footman, that had to be him. Before I could speak, a thought crossed my mind. Yuki's Harlequin alliance, they must be starting to move too. Everyone nodded in agreement, the atmosphere thick with the understanding of just how dangerous things were becoming. The masked Majins and the orcs were only the beginning. We will march as soon as Soe's report comes in, I said, standing tall. Everyone, dismissed. The room began to clear, but before anyone could leave, Trainee approached me again, her presence as calm as ever. She bowed deeply, her voice gentle but unwavering. Ruler of the monsters, Great Rimuru, she said, I humbly request that you defeat the Orc Lord. Of course, I began, but before I could finish, Shizu-san interrupted, her voice cutting through the air with urgency. Rimuru-san, would you hear my request too? Her eyes were resolute, and I could tell this was something deeply personal. I had a feeling I knew what she was about to ask. Sure, I don't mind, I said, giving her my full attention. What's your request? Shizu-san hesitated for a moment, then spoke, her voice softer now, tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Actually, I met a beautiful girl named Seal. Seal, I raised an eyebrow, curious but silent, as Shizu-san continued. The reason I've stayed in this town is to find an enigma, a person who extended my life by implanting an artificial spirit into my body. Rimuru-san, do you know what happens when a summoned person's body is too young to handle the energy from crossing worlds? I thought for a moment, the memory flickering in my mind. Yeah, if I recall correctly, children's bodies are too fragile to take in that energy without a unique skill or spirit managing it. If not, their spiritual bodies break down. Shizu-san nodded, her expression serious. Yes, I left a group of children in the Ingrasha kingdom. These children have the same condition. I've determined that Seal is the one who can help them, but I can't get through to her. She only responds to one person, Master. I blinked, processing the information. Wait, you're saying Seal can save them, but only if you get through to her. Yes, Shizu-san said, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. I thought, if I asked Ciel's legal spouse, she might be more willing to help. I thought you could convince her. Legal spouse? I blinked again, the words catching me off guard. Shizu-san, what are you talking about? Asserting dominance against Master's other women. I ignored the voice in my head, focusing on Shizu-san's words. A spouse is a bit of a misunderstanding, though. Shizu-san, however, seemed oblivious to the confusion. She continued, her voice now desperate. Please, Rimuru-san, if you defeat the Orc Lord, can you save the children? I'm begging you. Without warning, Shizu-san knelt down, lowering her head deeply in an uncomfortable display of humility. I stepped forward quickly, gently lifting her chin. Please, Shizu-san, there's no need for this, I said with a soft smile. If a friend is in trouble, you help them, right? I'll talk to Seal and do what I can. I'll save the children, don't worry. Shizu-san immediately stood up, her face filled with gratitude as she bowed. Thank you, Rimuru-san. I'm truly grateful, I nodded, reassuring her with a calm smile. You don't need to thank me. I was going to do it anyway. As she composed herself, I turned my attention back to Trainee, who had been waiting patiently nearby. So that's my answer. Shizu-san will handle the Orc Lord, and we'll assist the Kijins in their vengeance. But we're going to help the children too. With that, she disappeared as quietly as she had come, leaving us to prepare for the battles ahead. Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. How were the front lines? I asked, my voice steady but my mind racing. The orcs had launched a sudden and terrifying campaign to dominate the Jura forest. Their numbers were swelling, 200,000 strong, and with such overwhelming force, there was no race in the forest that could stop them now. I had already dispatched my eldest son, Gabble, and entrusted him with our strongest weapon, the Vortex Spear. But the situation was dire, and the pressure was mounting. One of the lizardmen soldiers, breathless and panicked, stepped forward to report. Chief, unfortunately, it's no good. The orcs' force is too great. It feels like we're fighting an ogre. And when we encountered them, even when we shattered their vital organs or severed their heads, they just kept regenerating. My eyes widened at the gravity of his words. Regeneration, at that level? What absurdity. That's not just regeneration, it's immortality. I exclaimed. I tried to push the report aside, but the soldier's tone was grave and resolute. But chief, it's true. His voice cracked with a desperation that struck me to the core. This wasn't an exaggeration, this was real. The orcs were something far worse than we had anticipated. Father, don't give up. My daughter, beside me, placed a hand on my shoulder, trying to hold on to whatever hope we had left. I'm sure brother will bring strong reinforcements soon. Her words were a balm, but even her optimism couldn't push away the sinking feeling in my chest. I was thinking, trying to find a solution, but the truth was this, the situation was bad. The lizardmen's home cave had only one entrance and one exit. For now, we were safe, but the orcs would eventually block the passage, and if we couldn't evacuate in time, we would be lost. The cave was eerily quiet, the tension hanging thick in the air. Then suddenly, the silence was shattered by the hurried footsteps of an envoy. He ran into the throne room and immediately knelt before me. Chieftain, he gasped, we've got an intruder. The intruder demands an audience with you. What shall we do? I could feel the intruder's presence even before he spoke. The aura surrounding him was no ordinary one. If anything, it felt as if even 100 of our strongest lizardmen would be crushed beneath his power. My instincts flared. The footsteps grew louder. The intruder was approaching with a calm yet menacing certainty. And then, I saw him. A towering figure, blue-haired and clad in black-blue garments. One horn sprouted from the middle of his forehead. He was an ogre, but not like any I had seen before. Ogres typically relied on brute physical strength and lacked much in terms of magical power, but this one had no apparent weaknesses. Who was this formidable being? Who is it? I asked, my voice steady but my hand instinctively tightening around the hilt of my weapon. I'm afraid we cannot spare any hospitality right now. The ogre's gaze was sharp, unwavering. His expression was serious, and he spoke without hesitation. Rest assured, I'm not here to cause trouble, he said in a deep, measured tone. I come to deliver a message from my master, the great Rimuru. Master. An ogre of this power had a master. I couldn't help but be curious. Based on your appearance, you're an ogre, right? I asked, raising an eyebrow. The ogre's face remained expressionless. Not anymore, he replied coldly. My master named me Soe, and I evolved into a new race called Kijin. My master seeks an alliance with the lizardmen to fight against the army of the Orc Lord. His words left me stunned. The Orc Lord, that mythical monster. I had heard rumors, but this was the first time I had heard it so bluntly. Kijin, I echoed, trying to process this new information. The mythical species born rarely from ogres. Are you suggesting that this master of yours is of a higher plane of existence than a Kijin? And the Orc Lord, that mythical monster? I had known something was off, but hearing the name of the Orc Lord from someone like this confirmed my worst fears. The situation was even more dire than I had imagined. According to Master Rimuru, Soe continued, his tone still as cold as ever, a dryad contacted them and solidified the existence of the Orc Lord. The mention of the dryad made the lizardmen around me exchange puzzled glances. They, too, were trying to process this new development. Dryad, I asked, now certain this was no ordinary conversation. The caretaker of the great Jura forest. Soe didn't flinch, he remained as stoic as ever. Yes, if the caretaker of the great Jura forest is supporting the claim of the Orc Lord's existence, then it is not something we can ignore. The words hit me hard. If a dryad, an entity so deeply connected to the forest, was confirming the presence of the Orc Lord, then this was a battle we could not avoid. But one of my underlings suddenly interjected, his voice uncertain. Rimuru. Who is this Rimuru? I immediately turned to the soldier, my expression hardening. Be quiet, I snapped, my tone sharp. I had already sensed the rising tension in Soe, and I didn't want to provoke him. But chief, it was a slime. A slime, the soldier shouted, his voice laced with disbelief. That can't be right, how could a slime have anything to do with the lizardmen's affairs? Before he could finish his sentence, Soe's eyes flashed dangerously, and in an instant, thin, sharp strings wrapped around the soldier's body, rendering him completely immobile. I apologize for my underling's behavior, I quickly interjected, my voice steady but firm. Please forgive him, he's not used to such news. Soe's expression remained impassive, but his voice was icy as he spoke, my bad. Insulting great Rimuru is not tolerated. I could feel the intensity of his gaze, and for a moment, I thought he might take the soldier's head. I quickly stepped in before the situation escalated further. Then, this Master Rimuru of yours, I began, my voice carefully measured, I'd like to meet him first before committing to an alliance. Soe's eyes softened just slightly. Understood, we shall meet in 2 to 3 weeks. Until then, you should prepare a defensive formation. Great Rimuru does not tolerate casualties. I nodded silently, too overwhelmed by the sheer power emanating from Soe to speak. As soon as he left, I felt an intense pressure release from my chest, and I nearly collapsed from the weight of it all. If I had made even the slightest mistake, the lizardmen would have paid the price for my recklessness. Father, my daughter's voice was filled with concern as she rushed to my side, her hand gently resting on my arm. Are you all right? I waved her off, struggling to steady my breath. I'm fine, I think I've seen hope. I straightened, pushing aside the fatigue, and turned to the gathered lizardmen. Everyone, assume a defensive formation. Powerful reinforcements will arrive soon. A roar of fervor rose up from the lizardmen, shaking the very cave we were in. The air crackled with renewed energy and determination. Our hope was restored, if only for a moment. TCH, TCH, TCH. Where am I? I groaned, the darkness of the night pressing in on me like a heavy weight. I woke up on the cold, hard ground beneath a tree, disoriented and aching all over. The faint light of the moon flickered through the branches, casting eerie shadows across my surroundings. My mind felt foggy as I tried to piece together what had happened. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could see 2 figures approaching in the distance. Their silhouettes loomed large against the darkened backdrop, and my heart skipped a beat when I recognized one of them. Lord Gelmid, I stammered, panic rising in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, despite my exhaustion. With as much composure as I could muster, I straightened myself and offered a respectful bow. My subordinates were gathered around, keeping watch, but it seemed like I was in no immediate danger. Lord Gelmid and Sir Laplace approached calmly, their figures gradually becoming clearer in the low light. Hey, Gabble, ain't ya lookin' a little beat up? Sir Laplace said with his usual nonchalant grin, though his tone was heavy with something darker. Actually, I hesitated, unsure of where to begin. What's going on? What happened? Before I could gather my thoughts, Sir Laplace's eyes widened in surprise. A huge monster village, he exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief. What are you talking about? Why yes, I replied slowly, piecing the situation together. Ogres, direwolves, goblins, and even a slime. There's a whole village of them. Lord Gelmud's face tightened, his gaze becoming colder. I had Footman and his army attack an ogre tribe just weeks ago, he muttered, as if to himself. Don't tell me there were survivors. His fury was palpable, and I could feel it weighing down on me. The thought of a monster village surviving the destruction wrought by Footman's forces was troubling. No, it was more than troubling. It was outright dangerous. I tightened my grip on the vortex spear that had been passed down to me by my father. But there was one thing that kept echoing in my mind, the slime. That slime. It was no ordinary creature. Even if I had used this vortex, the results would be the same. I had felt its power. No, its overwhelming power. And now, I understood why Lord Gelmud was so furious. Well, Gelmud, Sir Laplace interrupted, his tone dismissive. Ya shouldn't stress over the details too much. From what I hear, the orcs have gained immortality. No way that village stands a chance against the orcs' army. Immortality. I blinked, struggling to grasp what Sir Laplace had just said. The words sounded like madness, but there was no joking in his voice. No mocking, just certainty. I faltered, unsure of how to respond. What do you mean by immortality? And what's this about the orcs? I couldn't make sense of it. Sir Laplace and Lord Gelmud had just spoken about the orcs as if they were an unstoppable force. But what was going on? Why were they speaking so casually about something that sounded so catastrophic? Sir Laplace leaned in and whispered something to Lord Gelmud, their conversation too quiet for me to catch. The mood had shifted, becoming darker, heavier. And nothing, Lord Gelmud finally said, his voice low and tense. More importantly, Gabble, you heard us, right? The orcs have somehow gained immortality. There's a new orc lord, and he's the one responsible for this. If your people only defend yourselves, you'll be wiped out. If you try to flee, the lizard men will be destroyed in what I call the battle of nature. The words hit me like a thunderclap. Immortality, the battle of nature. Was that why we were so helpless? The orcs weren't just fighting, they were evolving, becoming something far more dangerous than we could have ever anticipated. The lizardmen's cave was our home, our refuge, but it was also a trap. If we left, our children would suffer, starve, or worse. If we stayed, the orcs would crush us with their endless numbers. Of course, you're right, Lord Gelmud, I said, bowing my head in reluctant submission. My voice trembled, but I kept it steady. Lord Gelmud's eyes flickered with something like approval. Good. Then, Gabble, as your lord, I command you to lead the lizardmen and defeat the orcs' army. With a surge of determination, I gripped the vortex spear even tighter. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my people, for the future of the lizardmen. Why yes, I said, my voice firm despite the fear gnawing at my gut. I, Gabble, shall lead the lizardmen's army and confront the orcs. Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. The chief of the lizardmen asks for your audience in 2 weeks from now, Great Rimuru. Soe's calm voice rang through the room, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked up at him, feeling the weight of my decision. No, I said, my tone firm. We march in a week from now. I'll make sure the revolution in the lizardmen's territory is stopped before it can begin. Soe's expression didn't change, but I could tell he was surprised by my urgency. May I know the reason for Great Rimuru's decision? He asked, his voice full of quiet curiosity. A week from now, the lizardmen will face their true test. We'll stop it before it spirals out of control. Soe didn't question me further. Instead, he nodded, as if accepting that my word was final. As you command. His composure was unshaken, just as expected. I sighed, feeling the weight of what was coming. It wasn't just the orcs we had to worry about now. There was something much bigger at play. As the meeting concluded, the night's calmness settled over Tempest, but beneath that tranquility, the looming threat of the orcs was ever present. All right, everyone, we march in 1 week. Let's be ready for what comes next. The room fell silent as everyone nodded in agreement, but I could see the determination in their eyes. We weren't just preparing for battle, we were preparing for survival. The orcs would come, and we would be ready. To be continued.